Why you suck at Total War, reason number 8. You waste your resources. With every army, you have a powerful set of tools at your disposal. A lot of these tools are finite in their usage, so they need to be applied most effectively. If the potential power in your hands is wasted, you're going to find it difficult to win a lot of battles. So first and foremost, one of the easiest to waste, magic. An essential part of the army in Warhammer 2, magic can be one of the biggest game changers on the battlefield. Use it in the right place at the right time in the right situation and you can absolutely change the course of battle. So if you let it go to waste by using it in places it's not really needed, or targeting units that aren't really important, or letting your caster die, or simply forgetting to actually use it up, you're going to put yourself at a big disadvantage if your enemy is using all of his. So a couple of ways we can make better use of our magic. Pick the enemy that's the most dangerous to you and utilize your magic to get rid of them. For example, I'm being approached by Black Orcs and Orc Boys. I'm pretty sure you know which one of these units is more dangerous. So on the most basic of levels, you want to try and get the most powerful units off the battlefield first. The quicker they're gone, the less likely they are to do damage to the rest of your army. So when I've got a powerful spell like the Fate of Una at my disposal, it's a good one to drop on the Black Orcs to bring them down to size a bit. It'll knock off a chunk of their health and make them easier to kill and get rid of for my Graveguard. So then all we've got to deal with is some Orc Boys, which will be no problem for Graveguard with great weapons. I could further add a bit more magic onto my Graveguard to help them get rid of that unit even quicker, because the sooner we can rout off the Black Orcs and get them running away, the less time they're going to be fighting, meaning the less damage they're going to do to us. So using your magic to get rid of the enemy's strongest units is often a good way to go with your magic, whether it's damaging, debuffing them, or buffing up your troops. But understand that may not always be the case, and sometimes weaker units actually may be more of a threat to you. It all depends on the army compositions and which enemy units are the most dangerous to your particular army build. So keep this in mind, but we'll look at this a little bit later on. The same is true of buffing or healing your troops. You don't want to use a healing spell on Peasant Mob, you want to save it for your big expensive cavalry. Whichever units are going to win you the battle, you want to try and keep them around. Using a spell like Earthblood and grouping units up is also a good way to make better use of your magic. You could use that spell on just one unit and heal them up, or you could group them together and heal 3 or 4 or 5 or 12 units, maybe. So it's just keeping an eye out for those opportunities where you can better utilize your magic. If you've got an explosion spell, you could just use it on the one unit and wipe them out, or you could wait for 2 or 3 units to clump up together and then wipe all 3 of them out. Look for those opportunities to make the most of magic. And the same idea for character abilities that just have a cooldown. Take Queek's Trophy Heads for example, a very powerful ability that used at the right moment can absolutely brutalize enemy lords. If you use it at a bad time though, if the enemy's about to run away or fly off, perhaps something's coming over to help them, then you can't make the most of that ability and it's kind of going to waste, and you'll have to wait for the cooldown before you could have that opportunity again. So a bit of patience and waiting for the right opportunity can make spells and abilities far more effective. In a similar vein, another powerful resource I see go to waste is breath attacks. Most armies in the game are capable of bringing something with a breath attack, and just like magic, at the right moment they can be very powerful, but I see them very often being misused. You want to try and span the entire width of a unit with the breath attack. I find this does the most damage and minimises the risk of friendly fire when units are engaged. I see a lot of people rush out their breath attacks, they don't take the time to position their dragon, and their breath attacks are either less effective, they miss a lot, or they have a lot of friendly fire on them. If you position like this directly in front of or behind an enemy unit, you tend to find that you're going to commit a bit of friendly fire first of all, and some of your breath attack is going to miss the main bulk of the enemy. It'll still do a good bit of damage, but it's not what it could be, and friendly fire. Here's a breath attack on some Harganeth Executioners from the front. Does a good bit of damage, takes just under half their health, still got 3,800 left. A good amount, a good bit of damage, but if we attack from the side of the unit, we get pretty much the entire unit, everything gets knocked around, and they're down to 2,500 health. So that's over 1,000 extra damage just from positioning my dragon from the side. So be patient with your breath attacks and look for the right angle. Another big mistake I think is trying to hit a moving target with a breath attack. Because the breath attack still hits the circle of where it was aimed, it very often misses most of the unit. it can still do a nice bit of damage, but not what it could have done if you used it properly. You can pretty much wipe out any infantry unit in the game with a well placed breath attack, if you only take the time to position it and wait for the right opportunity. Rushed out breath attacks are a waste in my opinion. Another incredibly valuable finite resource is ammo. A lot of factions and builds will rely heavily on the success of their ranged troops. Using your ammo on units that are considered low priority threats to you can be considered a waste. For example, my army here is all spears and ranged units, and I'm being approached by Chaos Warriors with great weapons, Marauders with great weapons, and a Shaggoth. Which of those is the most dangerous unit to me, do you think? Given I'm all spears and range. If you said, well, it's obviously the Dragon Ogre Shaggoth, you'd be mistaken. He is a very dangerous unit, but my army is not equipped to deal with Chaos Warriors with great weapons. That infantry is going to absolutely run my spearmen and missiles through. I've got plenty of spearmen or missiles that can both deal well with the Shaggoth, so he's not really that big of a worry to me, even though he is the most expensive unit and a very powerful one indeed. So this is the point I was trying to make earlier with the magic, that while taking down the most expensive, most dangerous units is often a good way to go, it's not necessarily always the way to go. It depends on what's the biggest threat to you. If your army is well equipped to deal with 5 Dragon Ogre Shaggoths, then you don't really need to worry about them that much. But if you're not prepared for 10 units of nasty skulkers, then you better find a way to use some of your resources to take out some of those nasty little bastard skulkers. So when it comes to using your ammo, try to put it in the most dangerous units to your particular army build. Don't just let your units fire off on whoever they want, wherever they want, whenever they want. Pick your targets wisely, it'll make your ammo go a lot further. But if the opportunity to absolutely nuke a Shaggoth with damage should arise, then you should definitely take it. It's all about focusing priority and putting ammo into things that really matter. The Shaggoth is still dangerous, but not as dangerous as the Chaos Warriors. Another potential big advantage to make use of is the terrain of the map you're fighting on. Hills and high ground, swamps, water, obstacles, houses, buildings, ledges, choke points, all these different things you can take advantage of on the map and use to give yourself the edge. The biggest two you'll probably see used will be hills and high ground, great for providing yourself a defensive position. It'll make the enemy less maneuverable, their cavalry and things won't be able to run up quickly and flank you because they'll run slower going up the hills. So a big advantage if you're coming with a defensive game plan. Another big one is using the trees, hiding your army in the trees or just hiding some units in the trees to keep them hidden and bringing them out for a cheeky surprise. Always a powerful tool if used correctly. A valuable resource that you could just ignore and not use at all, or one that you could try to make some good use of. So if it suits your army build, make good use of those woodlands. The trees also provide you a nice place to keep your lords safe if they're under heavy fire from artillery or missiles. I say safe, it'll keep them safer than if they were out in the open at least, as the trees may block some of the shots. So keep an eye out for advantageous strategic positions on the map. They may be very powerful and very useful to you, or maybe not. If you're playing a rush army, you don't really want to just sit up on a hill and wait for the enemy to come to you. So take a look at your terrain and think how it could be useful to you. It could be a resource that you can use. Now call me Captain Obvious here, but understand that your units are a resource as well. If you've got a unit that's not being used to its full potential, then it's kind of going to waste. Take these Altdorf Griffites here. They're accidentally chasing off these Goblin Wolf Riders. They're now very far away from the rest of the battle, which means they're not really doing anything useful for my army. They're so far away that by the time they get back here, the rest of my army is going to be in pretty bad shape because it could have used their help, as they are very powerful. This is what you might call a unit being out of position. These Griffites could be over here hammer and anviling these Black Orcs, helping out the rest of my army. But now they're so far away, by the time they get back, the rest of my army is going to be pretty well hammered by all the Black Orcs over here. So understand time as a resource with your units. When a unit is very far away not doing anything, you're wasting it. It's not being used, it's not helping the rest of your army. You'll actually see the AI do this quite often. These Crimson Killers over here are a very powerful anti-infantry unit, yet for some reason they're coming over to get after my cavalry and dragon. Two things that can very easily escape Crimson Killers. Those Crimson Killers could be over here smashing up Blackout Corsairs, who they would do very well against, but oh no, the AI is determined to try and chase my units that it will never be able to catch. There is no point chasing cavalry with infantry. It's not gonna catch it. Pull it back, put it in a position where it can be more useful and defensive. If you let a unit get so far out of position like these Crimson Killers here, they're spending 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes out of the main battle where they're not going to be of any use to anyone because they're trying to chase cavalry, which are so easily going to outmaneuver them, it's embarrassing. So don't be like the AI and let your units get dragged off into positions and places where they're of little use and they're going to have to spend most of their time running. My Black Ark Corsairs here just started to run off a bit chasing those missiles. They would eventually catch those missiles, but by the time they did, they'd be really far away from the rest of us. So instead I'm going to bring my Black Ark Corsairs back and send the Harpies to get those missiles because they're far better at doing that. They're so much quicker, they can kill off those missiles, and the Black Ark Corsairs can go back and help somewhere where they're more needed, thus not letting them get so far out of position that they spend most of the battle doing nothing. The other big danger of letting a unit get out of position is that it becomes very vulnerable and very easy for your enemy to isolate and pick off with the right tools. So try not to waste the powerful resource of time with your strongest units. Using a dragon to chase off Goblin Wolf Riders is really not worth it. Let Goblin Wolf Riders come back, they're not going to do that much damage. Your dragon could be over here helping out a unit that really needs it against some tougher infantry. Think of time as a resource and don't waste it. And lastly, another cheeky powerful tactic, the element of surprise is very useful in this game for catching your opponent off guard and forcing their hand. Of course, this is one that works better against other human players rather than the AI that half the time magically knows where all your units are regardless of whether you've hidden them or not. So the element of surprise can be seen as a valuable resource to be used if you can pull it off. And there's a couple of ways to do this. Vanguard deployment is of course the first and most simplest way to get this done, and using areas around the enemy deployment zone is a good start. So here as the vampires, I've got an Empire army in front of me and I want to try and get some sneaky all up in their grill. So I've got 2 units of Hex Wraiths, and if you go to the far corners of the enemy deployment zones, there's always a nice little gap to put a couple of units in. If the units have stalk or if there are trees are the best places to put them, as they'll be invisible as soon as the battle starts. And then as the battle does begin, you can bring the units towards the back of the enemy army and hopefully they won't notice them, and by the time they get there, it'll just be too damn late. You can try and take advantage of any ill-defended units and run them through quickly, or you can try and hit the enemy backline with some hammer and anvil. Whichever you can pull off, this is a very powerful tactic and will make people panic if you do it to a human player, and will force them to quickly rush to try and deal with it, which will ultimately probably lead them to making some mistakes. So look for some good opportunities in those corner deployment zones behind the enemy army. They can be very valuable. Another option is to use Vanguard deployment to just place a few units ahead of your main army to give them a little bit of a pushing advantage and to let them flank round that little bit easier. Like these Wild Riders here, they should have a pretty good angle to come up behind these dwarves as the dwarves are advancing. This can just make flanking attacks and envelopment that little bit easier because the units are further ahead than your main army. Do be wary when Vanguard deploying units that are vulnerable to certain threats though. For example, these Way Watchers will be very vulnerable to cavalry normally, and if cavalry came along, not that it will for the dwarves, they may well be in trouble and need some support, but because they're so far away from the rest of the army, chances are they won't get it. So do be careful when Vanguard deploying just 1, 2, maybe 3 units, they may need support from other units. And if you're really feeling ballsy, you can Vanguard deploy most of your army. There aren't too many factions that can do this really effectively, but Goblins and Beastmen are usually the go-to. This gives the enemy army very little time to do anything. If they've got a lot of missiles and ranged and artillery and such, they don't have much time to use any of it because you're right in front of their damn faces. It can be very powerful against certain factions, but is certainly not without its weaknesses. Either way, it's fun to mess around with and certainly a potentially very powerful tactic. And again, if an enemy sees an army right in front of their face like that, they're going to panic a little bit because they don't have time to think. They're going to rush their decisions, maybe make some mistakes, and that's just going to give you those advantages. The element of surprise is one of the most dangerous resources you can wield. Use it effectively and it can be crushing. So start to recognize these things as valuable resources not to be wasted. The further you can make all these things go in a battle, the better chance you give yourself of winning. And in a similar vein, try to force the enemy to make the mistakes with his resources. Try to dodge his magic spells, try to pull his units out of position. Make him walk through the swamp. Get him to waste his ammo on units that aren't really a threat to him. Making effective use of your resources is a powerful tool in Total War Warhammer. Learn to master these resources and you can further increase your chances of becoming the greatest Total War player of all frickin' time. Oh yes.